Okay. Good morning, everybody, and you're very welcome back. Again, we hope you had an enjoyable evening in Geneva. And we've had a slight change in the weather, so it's a lot more familiar to me this morning with a little bit of rain. So that's made me feel like I'm at home, except it's a little bit warmer than home. So we're on the final stretch. So this is the third day, but the last day of the CES plenary before we move on to the CSSP. I think there are a couple of new faces in the room this morning as people are arriving and leaving. So welcome to all the new faces, and hopefully we can catch up over the day. So this morning we've one topic, and I think it deserves a kind of a special place on the agenda because of its relevance to what we all do. And it's about the collaboration with private data providers. So you'll see on the podium, we have a few faces with us. I want to welcome Juan Manuel Rodriguez Po, who is the president of the National Statistical Institute of Spain. And Juan is going to chair the session. And we're also joined on the podium by Anil Arora, who's chief statistician from Statistics Canada, and Dominic Roskrut, who is the chief statistician or the director general of Statistics Poland. President is right. Okay, yes. This is where we need classifications. This is why we need a classification. So Juan is going to chair the session, and I'm going to stay quiet for the morning, more or less. So Juan, over to you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Pedrick, and good morning, everybody. Indeed, it's for me a pleasure to chair this session of collaboration with private data providers. I think it would be a great opportunity for us, first of all, to have an overview of what our institutions, both in the national side and international side, are doing in this direction. Of course, to exchange experiences. And what is also, I think, very important for us is to identify possible future actions at international level to support countries in using privately held data. As it was mentioned already by you, Patrick, in your strategic directions in official statistics, I believe this is one of the main strategic directions in the next years for us in the profession. And I think it's important to highlight that the collaboration with the private sector, it's important, not only for us as NSIs, but also for the private companies. I think it's important to realize and to convince them that in this exchange of information, there is also a profit and a benefit for them. The menu of the session, I would, frankly speaking, I think it's very interesting. We will have first a state of art of what has been debated already. Dominic will tell us about this. Then we will have a keynote speech by a private enterprise. In this case, it's going to be Telefónica, the main mobile telephone company in Spain. They will give us their perspective. Then we will have survey of different activities already developed by countries. This will be surveyed by Anil. And then we will have sort of perspective from the international agencies. This will be given by Lydia, Stefan, and Bachtel, somewhere in the cyberspace. And then we will propose the endorsement of text of a draft position statement that we have been already exchanging ideas, and I hope it will be of your interest also. So I don't want to take more time, and I think it's already your turn, Dominic, to give us your talk. Thank you very much. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Juan. It's my pleasure today to present the results of the in-depth review on the collaboration with the private sector data providers. Can I ask for the next slide? So the survey on the cooperation with the private sector data providers was carried out through November and December 2021. So the material is pretty fresh. We gathered case studies from 34 countries, out of which 28 were UNECE member countries and 4 countries were from the outside of the region. And we tried to concentrate on the points, presented on a slide, principles for accessing privately held data. Are there any communication and agreements with the stakeholders, legislation, of course, because this is something that we're aiming at, guidelines and handbooks for the use of privately held data, common IT infrastructures, and naturally training, competency building, delivery. Can I ask for the next slide? At the same time, we're trying to kind of do the review of successful stories and describe the attempts for collaboration, because this is a kind of like a new endeavor that we are trying to get in as a community of statisticians. So that's interesting always to learn the experiences of others. And then, of course, we were also aiming at asking questions in relation to the impact of the COVID crisis, because we know very well that, ironically, thanks to the crisis, we had a little bit better access to some of the data sources, and maybe we can learn on that experience as well. Next slide, please. So a little bit of explanation here. When we were designing our new logo, we just wanted to come up with a design that helps us answer all the questions that we can possibly have. And as you can see, it works, so this is our logo. But the message behind it is that, we very often attribute the privately held data to big data and the other way around, but this is not a synonym. So we can think of privately held data sources which are not big data. And at the same time, we can think of the big data that is not privately held data. And that's very important not to mix up those two things. So that's basically one of the conclusions of the in-depth report. Can I have the next one? So in terms of the data that was reported to be successfully accessed by the national statistical offices. Of course, the list is very natural, starting with the scanner data. And by the way, we didn't want it to focus on the scanner data itself, because we think this is a very well established area. So, and it's actually a very practically a successful story as well, and we can learn from, but we weren't concentrating on that. Then we have mobile phone data, transactions data, companies' websites, so that for the web scraping, accommodation or ticket platforms, electricity system operators, transportation, data from different associations of companies as well. This was one of the examples provided, and data from market research companies. Next slide, please. And of course, we were trying to come up with a kind of like analysis that would allow us to identify similarities across different, case studies. And we have found that there are basically 4 cooperation models. First was PPP, public-private partnership. Well, in Poland, we had the 4th one, P, it's prosecutor as well. That's a joke. Anyway, outsourced data collection, secondment model, and agreed data set specification. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about all of them. So let's start with the PPP model. The institutional arrangements, with the Association of the Automotive Industry or National Association of Bus, Truck, and Tractor Producers, and all of the involved enterprises which are within these associations. These were the cases when the PPP model was applied. The goal, of course, is to collect the raw data, process, and disseminate more granular data on the specific industry. So this is one of the use case models of cooperation. Next slide, please. Another one was secondment model, in which the employees from the NSOs were sent to the private companies to help with the methodology and data analysis, and of course learn a little bit about those sources. And the employee, of course, can share this acquired knowledge later on with the colleagues, but not the data itself. So it was kind of like a touching upon, but not really getting the access in a sense that we could, process the data within our premises. The third model is outsourced data collection. So in this, NSO cooperates with a specialized enterprise that collects or processes data and the information of the research methodology and a set of provided variables are described in the agreement. And what is the most important part of that? That's what I wanted to stress, and contrary to the next slide, the data were obtained free of charge. And in this setting, that we called agreed data set specification, NSOs receive strictly defined data sets from the data provider, a third party, which processes mobile network data because it was in relation to the mobile data. The cooperation is based on the agreement, regulating methodological and technical issues of data exchange, as well as a little bit of financial compensation. I just put it in a way because I don't like these two words. I don't like this phrase, but but I had to put it on the slide anyway. So next slide, please. And of course, we have some lessons that we've learned. We think, in terms of the enablers of the cooperation. Certainly, first of all, mentioned by everyone is the trust to the NSO. Probably that stems from the fact that we stick so heavily to our fundamental principles that we build this trust around us, and that's clearly an enabler. Then referring to the public interest, COVID-19 pandemic was an example of that. So we want to access it. No, but this is important for the crisis. Okay, that worked. The third one is a communication, understanding, and accepting each party's interest. The fourth one is attempts to achieve a win-win situation. And indeed, really, that's a good kind of a way of communicating with the partners. Then when we try to solve the problems in a way that's beneficial for both parties. Next slide, please. Then a flexible approach to NSOs. Of NSOs. I mean, we have to be very flexible in terms of how we communicate and how we kind of like want to do these things, so that the enterprises do not feel that they are invaded by our, requirements, and it's too cumbersome for them and too much work. So the next thing is NSOs. Previous slide. NSO's organizational capabilities, we have a lot of competencies in terms of data, especially in terms of IT solutions that we already have. This is a clear enabler. We know how to do this stuff. And the last one is a solid legal framework. That's very important as well, because we can communicate clearly what's the objective of whatever we're doing, and that helps. Next slide, please. Of course, we have identified some impediments as well. So among them, the low motivation of private companies to cooperate, or concerns about the privacy, public perception, or disclosing trade secrets. That's very common. The third one is the expectation of a cost compensation. As I said, I don't like it. The fourth one is lack of solid legislation. And of course, the last one, but not least, data quality. It's a big elephant and all the discussion in our rooms. So incompleteness or low usefulness of data for statistical purposes, lack of coverage, lack of quality assessment, and whatever. These impediments are very important. Next slide, please. So in terms of the impact of the COVID crisis, we clearly saw increase in the possibility of accessing privately held data for nearly 50% of the offices surveyed. Greater openness of private companies to share the data was observed, but with a preference to enter into collaboration directly with the government. So very often, they didn't even know that NSOs exist, but they want to operate directly with the minister, like let's say. The third point that I wanted to stress here is collaboration is regulated by bilateral agreements. So it's case by case, I would say. So it was not something that was designed in a way that can be continued after the crisis. The fourth thing is the urgency of accessing and using privately held data has faded as the pandemic situation stabilized. So, initially everybody was threatened with the pandemic, and everybody was willing to do everything necessary to fight the pandemic. But then, when the things go back to the normal state, this willingness is a little bit disappearing. And of course, NSOs expect legislative steps to ensure a solid legal basis to maintain access to companies' data. So still, this crisis was a good experience because now we have case studies that we can build upon and try to advocate for example, for legislative steps. Next slide, please. So we have some recommendations from the in-depth review at the international level. We think that's important to strengthen the cooperation between the task forces and dedicated working groups dealing with the access to privately held data. You probably know that we do a lot of work in this regard in the European statistical system that we can share with the other countries as well, and we have to strive for the coherence of work and complementarity in terms of various levels of international cooperation, because that enables us to have a clearer communication when we can use the same language all globally. Next slide, please. And at national level, we should leverage the potential of government agencies to connect with the private sector data providers. Certainly, it's a very important topic also to deal with at the national level. We need to reach out to other agencies and talk with them about this issue. It shouldn't be only our problem. It should be kind of like the topic of general discussions. We need to, in parallel, invest in partnerships that could enable sustained access to data and enable a better understanding of the data specifics. Next slide, please. Yeah, that concludes my presentation. Thank you very much. That was the last one. Thank you, but it disappeared.
Next slide, please. Okay, so thank you very much, Dominic, for your fast and wide survey about what we are doing. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Carlos Martinez Miguel, that's the right pronunciation, from Telefónica, Spain. He has a very long, he's Global Director of Internet of Things, Big Data, and Artificial Intelligence Solutions and Services in Telefónica. And I don't know if he's already connected.
Yes. Yes, good morning, everyone. Already connected.
Mr.
Thank
Carlos Martinez, good morning.
Morning. Can you hear me?
Can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Okay, good. So he's going to share us the view of Telefónica, which is an example of private company with a large data set and a huge amount of data. And I would like to thank you, Carlos, for your willingness to participate in the session and the quick response to our invitation. Carlos, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. It's a real honor for Telefónica and for myself to be participating in this meeting today to share a little bit of the things we're doing in the data space in Telefónica. And Telefónica is a global telecommunications operator, which is a market leader in Spain, the UK with the O2 brand, and in Germany, where we are called O2, also in Brazil with the Vivo brand, and all across Latin America with the Movistar brand from Mexico down to Chile or Argentina. And we've been working in the data space for a number of years already. And actually it was around, if you go to the next slide, it was around 10 years ago that our R&D department started to work on an idea. They wanted to see if they could transform network signaling, which is the information exchanged between mobile phones and the network to make things work properly, into mobility insights. And they proved that that was feasible. We also validated that there was a commercial interest from businesses and also from governments in this kind of insights. And we started developing the platform we call Smart Steps. Smart Steps is a platform that is able to transform this information that was already being exchanged in the network into valuable and useful mobility insights. And this information enables us to understand what the mobility patterns of the population are, how people actually move, and that also helps us to understand and infer where they actually live, where they actually work, where they go on holidays, which routes they follow when they move, which modes of transportation they're using, and so on and so forth. And we complement this mobility data with other variables coming from different data sources we have in Telefónica, such as our CRM system, where we have socio-demographic information like gender, age, the type of family, and some other data that is about this field. And then we complement that with spending power as well, with the kind of device they're using when they connect to the network. And also we started to work some years ago on analyzing web browsing traffic to understand what the real interests of different population groups are, just categorizing the web traffic they're generating from their mobile phones. So with all this information, we are able to really have access to actual data. Real data is not data reported or informed as you may have in a survey. This is actual data of the whole of our market share, which is usually around 30 to 40% in every country where we operate, and that can be extrapolated to the rest of the population in the country. And also with the advantage of having continuous data points on an hourly or even shorter basis and on a daily basis for sure. And also with historic data, we have gathered data much before the pandemic, during the pandemic, of course, and in this latter phase of the situation we're living through. So with all this data, we are able to deliver insights to answer different questions in different businesses and also the kind of questions you're asking yourselves as national statistics institutes. How do we do this? If we move to the next slide, please. We do this always beginning with what we call a privacy by design principle. So the most important thing in the way we work on data is that we protect the privacy of our consumers. So the first thing we do right after extracting information from the network is that we anonymize this information. This anonymization is done by our network operator in each country. So it's a separate entity from Telefónica Tech, which is SmartStep's owner. And this enables to guarantee that we cannot really re-identify any person behind the data we are processing. Gathering these millions of events on a daily basis, we are storing them and processing them. And this is really big data. This is probably one of the biggest data lakes in Europe, the one we have for the data coming from the UK and Spain mostly at the moment. It's one of the biggest big data platforms in the continent. We have also big data deployment in Brazil, covering the whole Latin American region, and it's also huge. And on this data, we run our proprietary artificial intelligence and analytics algorithms that we've developed throughout the years. We've been investing millions of euros per year in order to get to the best of breed platform we have today. These algorithms enable to detect what the journey customers or people are really following, where they are staying, so what we call dwells, what kind of events they generate in their routes, what we call the via points, interesting information along the routes. And with all this information, we are able to extract insights. What we do before we deliver is we aggregate this information. It's not individual information anymore, but we aggregate it in groups, usually bigger than 15 people, so that again, we reinforce the protection of their privacy and we make even more difficult to re-identify an individual. And finally, once we've aggregated the information, we deliver insights to our different customers depending on the kind of things they need. And we do that in a flexible manner. We can do it just sharing a database with them. Sometimes we build and provide them with a visualization tool as well, and we can even provide programmatic data through APIs. If we move to the next one, we can see is that during all these years, we've been working with different industries in the B2B segment that are interested in this kind of data to answer their business questions. If you think of transport, obviously understanding mobility patterns help civil engineers to better design new infrastructure for transportation, either highways or underground or train or even plane services. And we are helping them with our data to reveal their origin destination matrices, which much more actual and refresh information than what they were using before. And this has proven to be very interesting for them and also for private companies that are tendering for a certain private transport service in a certain route. If you think of tourism, which is obviously a huge industry in Spain and also in some countries in Latin America, knowing better what kind of visitors you are attracting to your location or to your spot or to your resort, you will be able to improve the services you offer to see if you're really capturing the kind of visitors you want to have, and also even to reconcile visitors with residents and assume and ensure, that the services you're offering in the city are good enough and flexible enough to cover and meet the demand you're having. So we're working here with local authorities, but also with hotel chains, travel agencies, and touristic resorts. In the retail space, obviously, knowing what's happening in the physical stores is absolutely critical, even although the pandemic has accelerated e-commerce. Most of the retailers still do more than 70 to 80% of their sales through their physical stores, and we're providing them with insights that enable them to profile their visitors at the stores as they do online. Online, they know who's accessing the website, where he or she is clicking, and how long is staying in every part of the website. We can do the same with our information through a store. We know where people come from, and if they come to that store because they live in the area or they work in the area, and we're also able to combining this information with IoT sensors to understand how people actually move and behave inside the store. And this is really helpful to build a pipeline of conversion from visitors to sales as retailers want. This is also very interesting for fast-moving consumer goods that I would say are even blinder than retailers about their consumers, because they don't have a direct relationship with them. And so they really need to understand what the customers' behaviors are, and we can provide that kind of information. This is also relevant for media companies, specifically for those that are delivering out-of-home content in panels and digital screens across the cities. So with our data, they can really understand what the real audience is for a certain campaign. They can really find the target they're looking for, and they can really attribute the results of that campaign just measuring that audience with our data. And last but not least, for instance, the real estate business. Obviously, in order to assess the value of a property, is key to understand the kind of traffic, the kind of population that is going around that property, and how frequent they come, and what the spending power is, and so on and so forth. So we're also providing our insights to these kind of companies to improve their businesses. So at the moment, we have hundreds of customers using our insights in 8 countries in Europe and Latin America, and it's a fast-growing business, specifically after the worst phase of the pandemic, where companies accelerated their digitization plans and their transformation around data. Moving ahead in the next slide, what you can see is what we are doing also with governments and multilateral organizations. Obviously, we're working with them in transport and tourism because these are topics of interest for governments, but also we've been working intensively around pandemics. And obviously the COVID pandemic has been the biggest case, and we've been collaborating very jointly with governments in countries in Europe and Latin America. But we even started with the Zika virus in Brazil some years ago. So we already had quite a lot of experience in understanding how mobility restrictions are actually working, and also how viruses really propagate, using our data as a proxy for that. We've been working also intensively, specifically or especially in Latin America, where these natural disasters happen more often, to understand what the impact is and how people are really moving after an earthquake or a flooding or a volcano eruption. We've run projects in Colombia, in Mexico, and Argentina, and other countries in the region. And we've been also working quite intensively, and still are, around migrations that can be generated by economic crisis or political crisis, like the one in Venezuela, where we were helping countries around Venezuela to better understand the flows of population they were getting, and prepare themselves to support that population and offer social services and all the support the migrants may require. And we are doing that also for some war conflicts, and also for other, let's say, more long-term migrations, like those that happen because of the climate change. And we've been working on some projects in Latin America also related to that, how rural population is moving because of the climate change to have better chances for life. Obviously, in the government space, we're also intensively working with national statistics institutes, and for sure, the Spanish one is the one we work closely, or we work closer in all our countries. We started working with the INE, with the National Statistics Institute in Spain, already 7 years ago. In the beginning, it was more on an exploration basis. So the institute wanted to understand how this data could be helpful to them, and if it could be complementary to other data sources. We also work together in agreeing on definitions, on methodology, and the way data should be delivered so that it can be useful to them. And finally, a couple of years ago, we started to work in production, let's say, and with actual data being delivered to them on a daily basis, and or with daily frequency, and this data being published, obviously, after being treated and processed by them, and mixed with other sources, being published so that it can be accessible for all the population in the country, for companies as well to make better decisions, and for citizens to just consult that data. And we've been working mostly on 2 aspects, on mobility insights and tourism insights. In the mobility space, what we are delivering is daily mobility matrices I was mentioning before to understand where people move from and to. Also what the actual population daily and nightly is in different areas across the country, and also the seasonal population, because we have people moving because of the summer holidays or even because of some labor seasons we have for agriculture or even for tourism as well. And we did this on a customized geographical grid that we built according to what the Institute required, and we're delivering this data to them. On the tourism space, which I said is a very important sector in Spain, is more than 10% of the GDP and recovering now after the pandemic. What we are helping the Institute measure is the inbound tourism, so international tourism coming in Spain, and we do this from our roaming in data. So we have information on roamers into Telefónica's network. Telefónica's network is the preferred network for international tourists, so have a very high market share there. Then the outbound tourism, which is Spanish people going abroad, that is also recovering after the pandemic. Domestic tourism, which is huge, and especially during the pandemic, has been the biggest catalyst for our tourism activity in the country. And we are doing this at the local authority or municipality basis, also province and region, so covering the different levels we have geographically in the country. When we look ahead, next slide, please. What we see is that, and what we expect is that this kind of insights we are delivering will be massively used and will be like the ingredient in every dish across the board, sorry, and we'll be also covering more use cases. Why do we feel that? Because first, new technologies are coming over in the following years, and they're already taking off, but in terms of data, we're not using them yet because they're not still massive, but they will, and they will provide us with higher granularity and better data. So 5G is, as you know, the new generation for mobile telephony, and will bring, and is bringing already more capillary and more dense or denser networks. So we'll have more geographical granularity, and also much more information as Internet of Things start to become a full reality with a lot of devices connected. And this information will be also compiled and will be complementary to what we do with mobile telephone information today. We're also working on new data sources, and this can come for instance, for our fleet management services that we have, for connected car services we already have on the floor and the ground, sorry, and also we are looking at the TV consumption profiles that we have for our streaming platform, which in Spain is around 6 million households, that will complement what we do already with browsing information to understand what the interests of population actually are. And we do believe there will be more and more automation in the way we deliver data, and also in the way data is consumed by our customers, by governments, but also by you national statistics institutes. And APIs will be for sure the preferred delivery mechanism, but there will be automation when you process our data together with other sources in order to deliver your statistics. Thinking of new use cases, specifically for you guys, for statistics institutes, some things that we see that will be happening massively in the near future, because we've already started to explore with some organizations, include climate change monitoring. We've proven that there is clear correlation between mobility data, our mobility insights, and air quality, for instance. And we've been working already in predictive models in order to see when the air quality is going to deteriorate and be worse than a certain threshold, so that you have to start just setting measurements in order to reduce traffic in the city and reduce pollution. And you have to know that ahead so that you can announce that to the population in the city, and they can react to it. We've been working intensively also in smart city planning, and I think obviously in transportation, in tourism, I mentioned before, but there's still a grand opportunity to work on other and planning for other services such as waste management, such as watering and for gardens and green areas, and everything related to cultural services, educational facilities, healthcare facilities, so that every service in the city is really meeting the demand is having today, but also that is going to have tomorrow, and that investments are really done in a data-driven way. Territorial cohesion and decentralization is also a priority in Europe and especially in Spain as well. And we do believe that our insights are a good proxy in order to understand how different regions are connecting to each other, and if the measurements we are setting up in order to decentralize economy and decentralize also even government functions really help to generate opportunities in other regions. And mobility, again, is a very good proxy for that, combined with the other variables I mentioned before. And finally, economic indicators in general. I mean, I think, sure, you may think of many. Some examples of things we've been doing so far include poverty maps, for instance, and also what we call opportunity maps. And opportunity maps linked to mobility. It's also been proven that mobility is linked to the opportunities to progress socially and to get a better life and to access to education and so on. So you can really understand if you have areas in a certain city or in the country where mobility is very reduced, for sure this will be correlated with areas that require investment and social support in order to make people there progress in their lives. So in a nutshell, this is what we're doing with telco data and what we expect to be doing in the near future. And we're really looking forward to keeping on collaborating with institutes like yourselves in the countries where we operate. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share this content with you today.
Thank you very much, Carlos, for your very interesting talk. As a personal reflection, I have to tell you the truth, I have become a bit more scared of my role as NSI in Spain after learning what Telefónica is doing and is willing to do for statistics. I think I have to study again my core principles and because otherwise we probably realize, no, all of us, that the train is running and we have to catch it somehow. And we have new actors in the scene, and we have to be fast and quick. Otherwise, we might be in somewhere where we don't want to be. Okay, so thank you again, Carlos, for this insightful talk. And I hope we will have the opportunity to meet in person there in Spain or maybe elsewhere. Let us go to the next point, and we are going to know now about more specific country experiences. I have the pleasure to have here on my right side Anil, who is going to give us a surely nice survey of what have been the personal or the country experiences. And I hope we will have some time also to exchange ideas and to discuss. Anil, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Juan. I think for those of you that have been around this table, you've heard a number of us, me probably more than others, say this is a competitive space. You'd be hard pressed to think that what Carlos was talking about, if you were to take the Telefónica name off, you'd almost think that they were a statistical agency talking about how they're using data to look at some of the issues that we face. So I just wanted to first of all just make 8 quick points in case you weren't as moved as my colleague Juan was. And then summarize the papers that were given. I'm going to give each country a minute and a half at maximum to either correct or maybe add a couple of points each. And then maybe summarize and then see if we can open up the conversation. So the first point I wanted to kind of, put in front of you is that those with the data are truly the power brokers. I think you saw that. You could almost go into any country, certainly in ours, in Canada, and you would have a very similar story from them. And it's not just the telephone company. I mean, every single company out there is looking at their data and saying, how do we monetize it? And how do we actually use it to gain a social stance in society as what is the good that comes out of their operation? So they are well ahead in terms of that trust equation. And so when you look at, the kind of trust barometers and so on, it's not hard to tell, why today CEOs are more trusted in companies than politicians, than government institutions, the media, et cetera. So this is not something they woke up to today. This has been a real strategy. And I don't mean that in a negative sense. I think it's a good thing, but we all have to contribute to society and the economy. But I'm just saying, where are we in this equation? You can see they're monetizing this value. So yes, the public good is an offset, but it's the monetary application. The second is there's an imbalance that's being created when things get monetized. Those who can pay get the kind of sophistication and the information they need, and those that can't don't. And there's another imbalance here, which is, what are the consumers in a particular? I mean, he talked about all the different sectors, the kind of information, detail, currency that they have, versus what are we providing? Our colleagues in the government who are making policies on these things. What vintage of information are we giving? What kind of detail are we giving as compared to what the industry or the association or that particular sector might have? And remember, governments are generally regulating these for public good. So you can see that imbalance in terms of the depth and the currency of information that's being provided. So if we are to remain relevant, you've got this real inequity that's happening. If that didn't kind of wake us up in terms of, where we are in terms of our ability compared to where the private sector is, I don't know what would wake you up. The kind of detail, the kind of, legal impositions that we have, the social acceptance, they're into, every social aspect as in terms of, disaster recovery to social services and so on. The fifth point is, a lot of these big players can invest huge amounts of money and on a dime, I would say, and they can attract the kind of expertise. They can experiment, try things, fail. Whereas, have a look at the kind of infrastructure that we have within the governments and where it's at in terms of the state of the art. We aren't even talking yet about artificial intelligence and data science and machine learning. The next is really the context. It is really as we come to, get there to share. I think it's really important to know the context of, when we talk about data sharing with the private sector, it's a very different context. Government legislation, in many countries, the legislation there in terms of, the attraction between business and citizens, very different than businesses to businesses, businesses to governments. Our own legislation as statistical agencies is in a very different state. And the next point is that of privacy advocates. I think, many privacy advocates lump us in with a company that has got a commercial interest, and they think that we're trying to do the same thing. And of course, being a government, there's the added complexity of us becoming a surveillance state. So I think, the advocates are quite influential. And I think governments and politicians, they understand privacy because it's something simple, right? That they get, which is, there's a breach, there's a cyber breach or whatever it is, and you have to protect the privacy. When you usually talk about statistics to government politicians, decision makers, they go on about how, that wasn't their that was their least favorite subject in school or something like that. And that's about it. And so they don't understand the fact that you need data to do statistics, and access to data is a precondition to doing statistics. And so that differential in terms of understanding is also very, very important. And I think every country has a different context and a slightly different positioning. And so where we are on that trust transparency continuum is, I think, very important as well. So I just wanted to kind of, take a few of the points and just kind of highlight them as contextual information that is needed. So let me just take a few minutes and try and summarize the papers that were submitted. I hope you all had a chance to read them. So I'm not obviously going to in the 15-20 minutes or so go into every detail of every paper. That's clearly not possible, and I don't want to do that. But I would say, clearly, I think as was mentioned by Dominique and others, the pandemic illustrated the need for us national statistical offices to be able to access privately held data to help inform policymakers. And I would say at the same time as response rates to our traditional data collection vehicles are declining and have declined, so that being able to acquire these data can eliminate the need in some cases for surveys or provide supplemental data or partial replacement for surveys, which is another key factor behind the desire for us to acquire these types of data, not to mention the currency and the detail and the ability to link these kinds of things. So we had 5 papers that were submitted on accessing privately held data. And so let me begin by saying that all the papers were really well done. I think you'll agree. They provide a very good overview of the types of data that were accessed, the challenges faced, or the lessons that countries have faced so far. And I thought I'd, again, set out the session with these summaries and then take a few minutes and look at some of the common dimensions across these papers and finally outline 4 or 5 themes that I hope will serve to guide some of the questions and the discussion. So let me start with the paper from Kazakhstan. This paper, I think, provided a good jumping point vis-a-vis the development of a national statistical office that's working towards building the capacity to harness alternative data sources to support the production of official statistics. And I think the paper provides an overview of the efforts that the Bureau of National Statistics is undertaking in part of its modernization journey. They outline 3 primary domains where they will focus their energy. First, improving methodologies. Secondly, expanding available data sources. And thirdly, re-engineering business processes and increasing statistical literacy. I think the paper provides a high-level overview of the actions taken under each domain. And then, of course, each of these actions are interlinked. Indeed, you cannot improve methodologies without having staff that have the capacity to undertake these activities. And you cannot access privately held data without having robust methodologies, highly trained staff, and business processes that can support the acquisitions of these data. The paper also makes a strong statement related to the following international standards and communicating with society. While not specifically related to accessing privately held data, the statement nonetheless, I think, rings true. The paper points out that the more the NSOs produce, the greater the demand for statistical information. Again, a blessing and a curse. The more we address the information needs of policymakers and society, the greater the demand for more and faster information. However, I think with the actions laid out in the paper by the Bureau of National Statistics of Kazakhstan, they'll be, I think, in a good place to meet this challenge. So at this stage, maybe I'll just give a minute to my colleague from Kazakhstan to see if he'd like to just add anything or correct anything.
We fully agree with those ideas that were presented today, and I just wanted to add a few words regarding the ideas that were told today. And one more important thing is the quality of data. I believe that many privately held data are lacking this quality of data, and even the top managers of these private companies, they sometimes don't trust. And in this regards, I believe it is very important to raise the issue of quality of the data within the private sector. And I believe that UNEC could be a provider of the methodology for the private sector in terms of for both public and private sector in terms of estimating the impact of the poor data for the public policy. there were some estimates that were done a few years ago by the private sectors themselves, and I believe the methodology could be done widespread and on the global scope. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that, and I appreciate the brevity and the summation. Thank you. So the next couple of papers that I'll summarize outline the use of privately held data during the pandemic. Again, Statistics Sweden outlined how beginning in 2020, they partnered with one of the largest mobile network operators operating there. And their paper is interesting in that it lays out the foundation of collaboration and partnership with privately owned data, which includes, of course, the EU General Data Protection Regulation, and how it's interpreted in Sweden by mobile network operators, or the MNOs. For instance, they note that there is a rigid interpretation of the GDPR by MNOs that results in a limited amount of time that individual devices can be followed by the network operator and client information that cannot be shared. Thus, Statistics Sweden could only acquire aggregated data along with information from the MNO about how the data are processed. The example of the use of this data by Statistics Sweden is really interesting because it illustrates the complexity of these data and how it's important that an NSO understands how these data are collected and processed. So in this case, the weighting of the MNO data was very complex because it's SIM card data that are measured, and these are associated with devices and then to the population. So, however, there are 40% more SIM cards than people in Sweden. So it comes back to the notion of interpretability and the quality that's there. The paper notes that the MNO data are of sufficient quality to detect short-term trends in population movements, for example, during holidays, and that the data were sufficient to monitor movements at the outbreak of the pandemic, but that these data are not suitable for official statistics as the quality is insufficient to adequately measure long-term changes. Nonetheless, these data were felt to be ideal as auxiliary data sources to be integrated with existing NSO data. And I wanted to draw your attention however, is related to the complexity of these data and how the data are processed within the telecom, how the telecoms interpret GDPR. And I would think it seems to me that while in the case of Sweden, all telecoms seem to interpret the legislation in the same manner, this may not always be the case. So this highlights the need to understand not only the data and how the data are processed, but also the legislative environment and the interpretation of that legislation. So in terms of the lessons learned and next steps, the paper points to the potential development of smart statistics, which can be useful to understanding commuting and seasonal movements at the local level. I think one of the most important conclusions of this paper is that Statistics Sweden and the MNO work together to better understand the data. They went from collaborators to partners where each could see the value that the other brings to the table. So maybe I'll just take a minute and see if Sweden wants to add anything to their paper or correct anything in my summary. Sweden?
Thank you very much, Anil, for your summary of this paper. This has been or is very interesting work. One thing that that you touched on and that I would like to emphasize is that given that there are 4 different companies here, there is definitely a win-win proposition here to the extent that we can, for instance, as you mentioned, weight data in a way that each individual MNO is unable to do. So we can certainly bring something back to them, understanding their own data, as we have a kind of wider perspective on the data quality here. Thank you.
An excellent point. Thank you very much. That's the value proposition back to them. Thank you. So again, sticking to the Scandinavian region a bit, we move now to the paper from Denmark. And this paper outlines 3 types of collaboration with the private sector by Statistics Denmark: mobile network operators, scanner data, and data from electricity or smart meters. So like many of the other statistical offices, Statistics Denmark saw an increase use of MNO data from the during the pandemic, and during the peak of the pandemic, Statistics Denmark was able to acquire these data. However, the flow of these data was stopped once it was deemed that the public health threat of the pandemic was reduced. Scanner data has been used in Denmark for consumer price indices since 2016. I think that's the case for a number of us. Of course, it took some time to be able to incorporate these data into the national statistical system, as the data had to be understood and tested, and the development of agreements between the data providers and NSOs had to include declarations of the frequency of data deliveries to the NSO. Of course, that's being critical to integrating these data into our official statistical programs. Other examples of the use of privately held data include the use of smart meter data being examined by Statistics Denmark, which can be linked to energy consumption to unique dwellings and businesses, and enables a geographic examination of energy consumptions, and during the lockdowns illustrated the extent of working from home. This paper notes that while some of the challenges they faced were well known, there were also challenges that they did not know they would face. Specific challenges highlighted related to the implementation of non-traditional data into statistical production processes, including not just acquisition of the data, but also the quality of the data, and importantly, the continuity of data flows. If privately held data are to become part of official statistics, these issues need to be adequately addressed. And so this paper also notes the challenges of accessing the data without a strong legislative framework, and that the data are often seen as a commodity. Thus, sharing the data with the NSO may be seen as losing a competitive edge, or in some cases, in an entire market altogether. So let me just pause here again and see if Statistics Sweden wants to add anything to my summary or correct anything. Sorry, Denmark, my apologies.
Well, thank you for possibility to participate in this. Well, your summary was very good, and I have just very few points. The first one, that I do agree with Juan Manuel about that the presentation by the Telefonica was kind of worrisome, because what I saw is that they have a huge ocean of data and they provide us a small lake. And then there is this discussion of how, whether we are interested in competing with them, and I don't think we can, but then we need a dialogue, which leads me to comment on my paper. Legislative framework is one thing, and it's of course always good to have it in your hand, but a concrete dialogue with data providers, like putting a face on who's on the other side, helps a lot, especially in identifying data challenges and data flows. and then putting it into like one-to-one dialogue helps in solving the issues. And then on the positive note, maybe we can discuss whether we move quickly enough. However, in my view, we are doing the right thing. We are facing a new challenge. We are trying to use it as good as we can in order to produce statistics. And at the same time, we have our statistical legislations forcing us to use specific data quality, the data requirements, and the data from private providers do not often fall into this category. And if we have more companies, it even makes it more complicated. So maybe we could speed up, but I think we are on the right track. Thank you.
Thank you, Denmark. I think, you know, just a little parentheses, I think we should also know that we're helping clean that lake as well. And in a sense, we could actually be distorting the market a bit by helping certain players as opposed to other players as well. So again, I think as governments, we need to, you know, we need government entities, we need to think about that as well. So thank you for that. That's great. The fourth paper I'm going to summarize again briefly is the one from Mexico. The context and experience of INEGI is interesting in that it differs significantly from most uses, as INEGI, as we all know, is both the NSO and the coordinator of Mexico's national geographic system. INEGI has accessed several different types of privately held data. One example is in the paper includes a pilot project with banking data where the banks transfer to INEGI micro aggregations of bank transactions to allow INEGI to publish monthly information for various types of transactions, including point of sale, cash withdrawals, and online purchases. Card not present at purchases. This paper notes that the banks see the mutual benefits of this collaboration as it illustrates that banks are living up to their social responsibility and can market themselves in this way. It also provides them better knowledge of their own markets. Of course, as at the NSO, INEGI undertakes quality control processes, verifies statistics, which has led to the improvement of the banking information as well. They also have access to the automotive industry data to be able to produce the administrative registry of light vehicle authority on a monthly basis. And the agreements with the companies on this guaranteed the flow of information and allowed INEGI to disseminate information at the brand and the company level. Just a little note that the agreements included the conditions that INEGI could not undertake any type of statistical treatment, nor could these data be subject to the regulations or filters of the rest of the official statistical programs. So this compromise means that updates are irregular and inconsistent and often show significant variability. And so this paper notes that the incentives for the private sector to collaborate differ. For some, the public good is sufficient. For others, financial incentives are a primary motivator for collaboration. So I'll just pause there and see if Graciela has any comments or additions.
Just would like to add that we're trying to use our experience with the automotive industry to get under other industries on board. Particularly, we have now held conversations with the construction companies, but there are certain regulations, particularly the competition regulatory authorities, that we need to take into account before moving forward. So it's not only the direct conversation with the private sector, but with other authorities within the Mexican government. So that I think it also should take into account before thinking of this direct relationship between national statistical offices and the private sector. There are regulatory bodies that sometimes are difficult to overcome. Thank you.
Yeah, an excellent point. We are interjecting ourselves into what is an established system, and so we need to be mindful of that. One final paper that was submitted, and that's from Australia. But before I get to the paper, and I promise, I think you'll understand why I'm going to hold my summary of that paper for a minute. I want to just elaborate the use of private sector data in Canada. We, like many other countries, use scanner data for price indices. We also acquire data from land registries and property assessment programs, and have created a residential property database to provide comprehensive information on the housing market in Canada. And these are a couple of the examples of the success that you can have from these collaborations. Of course, I think many of you are aware that several years ago, as we were moving forward, we were trying to obtain access to some financial transactions data as part of a pilot. And while we had run this through our Office of the Privacy Commissioner, when the media got a hold of the government accessing their data, well, frankly, all hell broke loose in Canada. And this was because, frankly, we were not prepared for this. And we hadn't sufficiently conditioned the public and Canadians for us to use and access their data. And this is why NSOs, I think, have to be aware of what could be considered socially acceptable. And since this time, we've put some very, very strong frameworks in place, including an ethical framework that examines necessity and proportionality, also developed a trust center on our website that provides information to Canadians on the work that we do, and the safeguards we've put in place. Up until now, I didn't think we really cared that Canadians knew how we did things. We just assumed that
you know, they didn't really, but they do care, and they're becoming more and more aware. I think some of you also attended a side session of the UN that I had done in partnership with our privacy commissioner on the necessity and proportionality framework that we developed. Which leads me to the final paper, and that's from our colleagues at the Australian Bureau of Statistics. And the ABS paper notes that during the pandemic, there was an increase in the use of private sector data. And the ABS was able to access lightly aggregated financial transaction information during COVID and was able to use it for data confrontation of existing data. And after further investments, they were able to use the data to develop a new spending indicator that they plan on further investments to produce level estimates. So as I said, you know, I saved the summary of this paper to the end because this paper focused not so much on what types of data were accessed, but rather focused on the lessons learned and how these lessons led to the development of a framework for the acquisition, curation, and maintenance of privately held data by the ABS, which includes defined roles and accountabilities within the NSO, the use of cloud computing to ingest, store, and process data, and prioritization by senior management of acquisitions of high value or priority targets for acquisition. So looking at the lessons that led to this framework, first was the case, sorry, before I go there, I'll maybe just turn to my Australian colleagues to see if they wanted to very briefly make any corrections or additional comments.
Thank you, Anil. That was very, very accurate. Thank you. I think just really to stress about how we had to coordinate and prioritize what private data sets we wanted to acquire. We didn't want to be looking like amateurs, and we'd started to step into that space in terms of everybody wanted to be talking to private sector data providers. And so actually doing it where we've got an across the whole organization thinking about what are the priority projects, what are the priority data sets, and also having very clear roles. So for example, we've established a chief data officer role as well. So that has helped bring some calm and order. And it means then that when we are going out and interacting with the private sector companies, we look way more professional. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. So as I said, looking at the lessons that led to this framework. First was the case in the examples from Sweden and Denmark, the building of trust and relationship with data holders. I think it takes time, and they mature and change over time. Even once the relationship has been developed, it takes time to formalize agreements and ensure technical readiness. So whether it's IT security, whether it's privacy controls, of both parties to be able to send and or receive data. And this is not unexpected, as the same approach applied when NSOs were negotiating access to administrative data with other government departments many, many years ago. And for Canada, this involved our central tax agency or our Canadian Revenue Agency. The ABS paper and the paper from Sweden also highlighted that significant investments are required in systems and capabilities at the NSO to support the acquisition of these types of data, and as was just mentioned, you know, the professionalization and the formalization of these structures. I'd say both the ABS and the papers from Mexico and Denmark highlighted that the motivations of the private sector within and across industry need to be taken into account. So for some, the public good may be enough to have short-term partnerships. For others, financial motivation is top of mind as they see their data as a commodity or an asset and actually expect compensation, and may even put restrictions on what we can disseminate to what level and frequency as well. And we need to be mindful of some of those agreements. And I would like to again thank all the colleagues for submitting excellent papers for this session. And I've tried to summarize these papers as best and as correctly as I can. So I would say, as I mentioned earlier, just wanted to kind of put out 5 themes that would set up the conversation. The first theme is related to the formal agreements or the legal aspects or capacities required to acquire privately held data. The second relates to trust and social acceptability. The third
is related to the collaboration and the relationships that are to be built. The fourth theme I propose is the international community and the opportunity for collaboration. And finally, the fifth theme is related engagement models that enable the acquisition of microdata. So with that, I turn it back to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Anil, for this excellent report on country experiences. And we both have some questions to excite the audience to participate, but maybe it's just better to open the floor for directly to our colleagues, because I'm sure some of them have very interesting things to say. Norway?
Thank you, Chair. First, I think this topic is extremely interesting because it covers so many different aspects of our business. It's legal issues here, it's technology-related questions, it's about communication, and definitely it's about innovation. So the most important point for us is that I really don't think that it's any choice to not try to enter this arena. We have to start and learn, adjust, and continue, because the alternative to just sit still and not enter into the privately held data arena, that would be a huge mistake. In Norway, we actually, as a direct result from a European peer review back in 2014, we got a new statistical act in 2019, and that new act gave us a very, very strong mandate to demand privately held data free of charge. And this new legislation is actually, we are taking it into action now. We take decisions every year, let's say about between 5 and 10 decisions about information requests from private owners. And most of the time, this is not complicated at all, particularly when you ask for aggregated data, for example, and with low reporting burden and simple questions. But it's obviously much more complicated when we demand huge, micro data. Let's say the current topic in our agenda right now is about all the receipts from all the shops, more or less 90%, 95% of the all grocery stores in the country on a daily basis. Then you talk about huge amounts of data, and it's a lot of questions. And what is important learning for us is that stakeholder management or dialogue, as explained by Sweden, Denmark, and the others, is very important. And it's not enough with the legislation, but it's very good to both have the legislation and work hard with the communication and stakeholder management. And we are required in the law to clarify what is the benefit by requiring this data. We can't just get data without really explain that this is, big benefit for society. It's not only one statistics, but even more statistical products. So that is one very important part of it. Another part is, of course, to minimize the cost for society. And then privacy issues is, of course, the most important part, how to minimize data collection, how to make sure that we actually protect privacy. And we meet the GDPR regulation here. And currently we are in a process where our decision on privately held data on this one of these topics is complained, or it's appealed to the Ministry of Finance. And in many ways, I think that is positive, because it is an open process where the owner of privately held data can come up with their arguments. We must come up with convincing story and arguments from our side, and this is open for everyone to look into. And finally, someone takes a decision, and perhaps we have to adjust, but we learn and we explore this new legislation. So I think it's important, but we won't be able to we won't be able to succeed if you don't have a good story. And then you are back to the stakeholder management again, because you have to explain to the public why you need this data in the first place. And I think one very simple point from our side is to underline the very obvious thing here. And that is that it's really not acceptable to put the statistical organization into this picture of Big Brother. We are not, we are not the police or tax authorities or, any other, like any other governmental agency. We are there for everyone, for ensuring equal access to facts for the, ordinary citizen in his discussion with the, decision makers. And in the debate, this very simple message is also important to actually explain and repeat. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we have Azerbaijan.
Таир Будагов, председатель статистического комитета Азербайджана, буду говорить по-русски. Большое спасибо за предоставление слова. Я должен отметить, что вопрос использования данных из частного сектора является очень актуальным для всех стран. И, естественно, Азербайджан тоже в этом вопросе имеет определенный опыт. Я хотел бы поделиться этим. Уже с 2017 года Статистический комитет Азербайджана заключил договор со всеми игроками на торговой сети, продуктовыми торговыми сетями, то есть с сетью супермаркетов. И фактически у нас сейчас ежедневно в оперативном и в автоматическом порядке имеется интеграция цен на продукты со всех торговых точек в базу данных статистического управления. Это еще началось до пандемии. У нас уже сейчас мы пользуемся этими данными. Более 5000 наименований продуктов, которые цены ежедневно поступают к нам, и мы имеем возможность мониторинга потребительских цен и расчета, естественно, коэффициента. Я думаю, что этот вопрос нам, конечно, удался не сразу. Мы неоднократно встречались с руководителями сетей супермаркетов. Конечно, у них были какие-то опасения за то, что будет конкуренты могут узнать их политику в области цен и так далее. Но после того, как мы заключили соглашение с ними и полностью определили обязанность каждой из сторон, то есть этот вопрос уже начал постепенно наращиваться, и на сегодняшний день у нас фактически без проблем проводится это мероприятие. Это нам дало возможность, во-первых, повысить качество и охват мониторинга потребительских цен, и во-вторых, значит, у нас освободилась определенная рабочая сила, которая занималась непосредственно мониторингом цен, и это дало нам возможность использовать наших сотрудников в других отраслях статистики. Спасибо за внимание.
Okay, thank you, Azerbaijan. And now the representative from Austria has the floor. Thank you, Tobias.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Dominic and Anil, for the great presentation, and thank you to all countries which provided some experiences. I think that the access to privately held data and collaboration with the private sector is of outstanding importance. This is no doubt. I would like to come back to the interesting presentation of Carlos Martinez, actually, and if it was the aim to give this presentation to hammer in our heads there's something to think about, then you made a very good job to invite him. Because I had a look at the numbers from the annual financial report last year, and only from this sector, which they call Telefonica Tech, they made a turnover of 1 billion euro. In comparison to the previous year, 33% plus. Actually, they do it in 8 countries. to say some comparison, with this turnover, only this business unit is more than 12 times bigger than Statistics Austria. Okay, they do it in 8 countries. So in each of the 8 countries, on average, they make 50% more business than Statistics Austria and Austria. So this is something to think about. I like numbers, so I would like to share some more with you. Thank you.
Excellent contribution. We like numbers, all of us.
When are you going IPO?
Okay, please, the representative of UK, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. The UK really welcomes this discussion, and particularly your intervention, Chair, when you said that this is a train that we need to be on. However, while we in the UK believe in numbers, and we love numbers, yes, but only if they are in the public good, and only if they are providing numbers which are inclusive to our whole society. And that is where these public data really have a way forward. But as national statisticians and national statistics offices, we believe in the UK that you need to be incredibly radical about their usage, and to do so at great pace in order to ensure that these are not just numbers, but numbers which are actively and ambitiously helping every citizen of our country. And that is what we are doing through the use of all the types of data that were presented so eloquently in the beginning of these data. We do so, though, and I think Anil has made an incredibly important point about public engagement. It is incredibly important to have good public engagement, not about the types of data, but about the benefits to society, the benefits to citizens in using those data, and also to include the public in the decision-making around how those data are used, as well as to engage in conversations with the private sector. We also believe that we need to recognize that the capability to handle the sorts of data that we are talking about is a capability that is not always held within national statistics offices. And so the UK is in partnership with the Alan Turing Institute, which is the UK's National Institute for Data Science, to enable us to be able to be beyond the cutting edge in the way in which we bring these analyses to benefit our public. The final point I would make, though, is that it seems to me, necessary to really think through how the use of these data, the enormous benefits they can bring to all of our citizens, really work with a traditional fundamentals of official statistics. The principles, I would suggest, need to be refreshed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we have the representative of New Zealand. You have the floor.
Thank you. I wanted to contribute on a few of the points that have been made for to set up the discussion, and the first one was the point that was made just before around the fact that having legislative authority to demand, to request, to require private sector data is not enough. So we already have some limited powers within our legislation, and we have a new piece of legislation just going through our parliament at the moment, which will give us greater powers to demand data from the private sector for research and statistical purposes. But our experience is basically all that does is get you through the door. So all of the challenges that others have talked about around social license or social acceptance, technology compatibility, data quality, the motivation of providers, all of those things actually are still just as important. Having the legislative backdrop is probably useful for two things in my experience. One is being able to have the conversation and open perhaps some doors for a conversation that wouldn't otherwise be open to us. And the second is sometimes when you're working with groups of providers, say mobile phone providers in New Zealand, being able to demand it from everybody means that they will all move at the same time, because we had a situation where one of our providers was prepared to do it if they knew their competitors were going to do it, but not prepared to do it if their competitors weren't going to do it. So my ability to be able to demand that information actually meant that they all knew they were going to move at the same time. So that sort of unlocked some things, but it is by no means a panacea to fix all of the other issues that we've talked about. Which I think leads me to the second point, and the point just made by the UK, which is, and others, which is that public engagement is really important. So there is a debate going on at the moment in New Zealand because of our new legislation around, are we getting powers that are too wide and too expansive? And so we do need to go out and talk about both the benefits to New Zealand or to our country of having access to these new data sources, but also what are the safeguards around it, and what are both the privacy safeguards, but also, to pick up some conversations from the last couple of days, those ethical safeguards as well. So how do our citizens know that there are the right ethical choices being made, as well as just the privacy implications? Then the last point I just make is around our experience around motivation of private sector data providers. And I think it's been two things. One has been where we can appeal to the public good, and the pandemic, like for others, the pandemic was very helpful, but using other levers as well. Our supermarkets are under significant pressure at the moment for being monopoly providers in our country. So using that effectively as some leverage to help them be seen to contribute to the public good. But also the other thing we've relied on is finding win-wins. So what do the private sector providers actually get from giving us their data? And like Sweden, we did a piece of work with our telecoms providers where we were able to aggregate the data and give it back in an anonymized aggregated form. So actually all of the three telecoms providers had access to a greater form of data than they would have if they weren't part of the overall scheme. So just a few observations about how to actually make this work in practicality. And my key point is the legislation is helpful, but it does not overcome any of the other barriers that we've all been talking about today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we have the representative of Colombia. You have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We would like to highlight the enormous efforts that have been performed both in the in-depth analysis and the country experiences. And we believe that we should consider this access to privately held data as a regulatory problem in regards that when we think about regulation, we always think about having mandatory access, for example, to privately held data, but probably we, the statistical community, we should learn about the developments of optimal regulation models under which we should understand very well that there are some conflicting interests between the private sector and the public sector that will represent as official statistical offices. More importantly, we should recognize that there should be some incentive compatibility constraints that should be followed in the way we develop a privately held access model, because those incentives are very important. And we believe that the documentation that was shared to us was very clear in setting that incentives or identifying incentives is something very important. And in that respect, when we should consider that those incentive compatibility constraints should be tied together with some individual rationality, because the private sector, as we saw the experience of Telefonica, they have a standalone basis of data production that they want it to be profitable. And we should find a way to get the compatibility of incentives between the private sector and the public good that we are providing with these official statistics. That's why in the case of Colombia, we feel identified very well with some of the barriers that were documented in the in-depth analysis and in the country experiences. And we believe that this information is going to be highly useful in the discussion of data stewardship, because probably the idea of data stewardship is how official statistics and statistical offices will become data stewardship compatible, and how we are going to set the incentives in order to share this information with the private sector, in order to increase the value of official statistics and the public good which lies behind that we were discussing the days of this conference regarding the fundamental principles and the core values of official statistics. So I believe that the alignment of this discussion of privately held access to information and data stewardship could be of great use and could be very productive, because this is going to allow us to understand better in a way of a toolkit which are the incentives that we see in every statistical system, which are the rationality constraints that we see in the private sector, and how we could develop exchange mechanisms that could allow to get this very important objective of enriching the set of information that we produce as official statisticians in our countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Juan Daniel. And now, UNCTAD, the representative of UNCTAD, has the floor. Please.
Very much, Chair. As a friend of Lydia's principles, I wanted to refer to the fundamental principle 5, which does say that data for statistical purposes may be drawn from all types of sources and are to be chosen with regard to quality, timeliness, cost, and the burden on respondents. This wording is not directly quoted in the draft declaration, but the idea is clearly reflected there. And like noted before, I think we need to answer the question of why should we have access to privately held data and not have private companies share their insights directly. Of course they can, but privately held data may also reflect the customers of a certain company and be not fully representative. Statistical authorities within their mandates can combine data from multiple sources for better quality and provide valuable insights without commercial or any vested interests. I think it's also important to note that accessing data for statistical purposes, as was mentioned, does not entail any use of the data for decisions or actions regarding individuals. Official statistics are produced to recognize standards, regardless of data sources, and with high transparency on methods and limitations of the results. UNCTAD recently published its digital economy report, and we noted that digital data are increasingly held by a very few multinational companies. We really need to ensure equal access to insights and benefits from data. The discussion here is also very interesting, considering UN Secretary General's initiative on global data governance, which considers how to facilitate cross-border data flows and innovation, thinking of business opportunities, but also to ensure data ethics and approach to data as global public good. Thank you very much for the interesting discussions and the papers shared.
Thank you very much for your contribution. And we have two last interventions from CES Stat and from the National Statistical Office of Portugal. I would be very grateful if you are brief. Thank you very much. We can start by CES Stat, please. You have the floor.
Спасибо большое за возможность представить свою позицию. В дополнение к уже сказанными странами СНГ, Казахстаном и Азербайджаном об опыте и замечания по докладу, я хотел бы обратить внимание еще на две категории потенциальных участников, частных поставщиков. Это социальные сети, операторы социальных сетей, интернет, и маркетинговые компании. В странах СНГ есть опыт использования этих двух категорий, успешный опыт, и более того, мне кажется, что представляется очень интересное дальнейшее развитие этого использования данных этих людей. Но прежде всего, этих категорий, прежде всего, в чем их интерес? Они заимствуют методологический опыт статистиков и обогащают свой опыт. Во-вторых, эти данные уже собраны, и вторичное использование ими, коммерческое использование этих данных им тоже интересно. Статистикам интересно по 3 причинам. Прежде всего, это может быть дешевле, существенно, чем проводить собственные исследования, и во время пандемии мы видели такие примеры. Во-вторых, оперативнее. И в-третьих, это дает новые возможности для анализа. Поэтому вот мне кажется, что если чуть остановиться на социальных сетях, то есть онлайн-исследования участников этих социальных сетей, то там есть, конечно, 2 проблемы, которые еще не решены у нас. Прежде всего, смещение факторов, которые такие необъективных факторов, прежде всего, но с объективными факторами: пол, возраст, уровень образования, место жительства. Это легко можно перевзвесить эти данные. А есть факторы, которые не наблюдаются. И вот здесь, конечно, методы устранения смещения на вот этих неопознанных факторов, конечно, большая методологическая проблема. Вот. А что касается маркетинговых компаний, сейчас эти компании развиваются очень активно, и их панели не уступают по размерам статистическим панелям. И кроме того, там собирается огромный объем данных, и вполне они заинтересованы, эти компании, участвовать вместе со статистиками в анализе этих данных, формирования пока каких-то на пилотных проектах, вот тоже таких статистических данных, которые вполне возможно при хорошей отработке методологии и взаимодействия могут стать и официальными данными. Спасибо большое.
Thank you very much. Portugal, you have the floor.
I'll be brief, right? So it was an excellent session. So the problem is that we come here, we discuss, but we try to bring solutions, right? And maybe, as Anil said, we have a problem here of what is the social contract. And the other issue is, as the representative of Austria pointed out, and other colleagues, is that maybe we are treating all the privately held data sets as an homogeneous group. And it's not the case, because we had the example of Telefonica that was a good example of how it is difficult to access this data if the company is making money with the data. So how can we step in and say, look, we want the data to produce a public good and so on. So maybe we need more regulation, maybe we need the support of if we don't have the support of a parliament, if we don't have the acceptance of the public, it's very difficult for us. Even in some countries, difficult to access administrative data, because they look at us and say, oh, well, you are integrating everything. And again, as someone said, well, the big brother is watching you. And we have, I'm not going to repeat this, but I confess that my level of cortisol is really increasing when I'm listening to this. Okay, we are NSIs and so are the core values, but how can we step in and get access to this data? Thank you.
Thank you. Oops. Someone else? Greece. Oh, Greece. Look, we are really out of time, so I would beg. Yes, a minute. Okay.
I would just like to say, I would just like to say that it is very interesting what has been heard so far, but I wanted to point out, maybe it's because I'm from the legal background, I didn't hear that much emphasis put on the right to privacy. And I think this is a right which is different than the right to data protection, because it involves the idea that there is some amount of information about one person that no one can learn about, no matter whether you guarantee confidentiality or not. So I believe that when we talk about access to privately held data, which is basically that we are going to be getting information about people from third parties, not from themselves, and especially if that access is guaranteed by law, so it is obligatory, I think this is a very important part that we need to inject into our ethical discussions. When do we stop because of privacy, which is a basic human right? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. This is also a good point. I think it has been an excellent sessions in terms of exchange of ideas. I have kept some, and I will tell you briefly, a very brief summary. First of all, we cannot miss the train. That's this is probably the last opportunity to become part of the holders of data sets and to be able to produce official statistics with them. But as it has been mentioned also, we have to make clear that we have a public good. This is a public good, and we have to be able to handle this in our relationships with the private data holders. I support also the idea of having a dialogue with them and getting trust among ourselves. This is probably a long process, but it's of course needed, and it will surely take time. Also, I think it's very important to mention legal context here: property rights, privacy. Actually, from the European context, we are now in the process of amending our 223 regulation on statistics, and one of the main reasons is to open a legal door for the access of our NSIs to privately held data. It's also necessary, of course, in all this process, the public engagement. Otherwise, that would be very difficult. And indeed, as Tobias mentioned before, the way I proposed Carlos to give us a talk, and the representative of Telefonica, mainly because of that. I think it's a good kick on our head in terms of realism, of where are some and where are we. And I think this is probably a fair summary of what has been said here. Also, I'm sure that some other ideas have not been taken, and we will have maybe the opportunity to discuss them later. Okay, we are a bit out of schedule, so we go to the next part of the session, which is the presentation of international activities. We have first from the Secretary of UNICE, Lydia, who is going to give us some international activities related to the access to privately held data. Lydia, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. We'll move now to a section where you'll hear what the international organizations have been doing in recent years, trying to support the work at national level. As you will see, first, the role of the international organizations is to help countries facilitate their work. And from the two presentations that you'll see, it's clear that over the last several years, we have been trying, the various international organizations also present in this conference, to facilitate the work of the national statistical offices. Now, there is a paper that summarizes the various activities of the international organizations, and this is paper 25. Actually, it's an extract from the in-depth review paper that Dominic presented earlier today. However, the information from this in-depth paper was updated. And I was asked to introduce the various activities of the international organizations on behalf of all of them. Now, First of all, as I mentioned, one of the key roles of international organizations is to develop principles for accessing privately held data. I just wanted to mention from the start that we have tried here to combine the 5 thematic areas where the international organizations have been active. And the first one is principles for assessing privately held data. Because the principles help underline the public interest purposes. And although these principles are not legally binding, they can be used by the national statistical offices as practical guidelines to improve the communication with the private sector. In the paper, but also on the slide, examples are mentioned. For example, one example is the principles for access to big data sources of official statistics prepared by the UN Committee of Experts on Big Data. You know, such a committee exists. Another example is the recommendation on enhancing access to and sharing of data by OECD, which presents a set of principles and policy guidance on how governments can maximize the benefits of data sharing while protecting the rights of individuals and organizations. The second thematic area is about communication and agreements with stakeholders. Because, as we also heard during the discussion, active engagement with stakeholders is crucial to overcome factors that may hinder data sharing. And of course, the international organizations have made efforts to improve communication and also to establish shared agreements with private sector providers. Yet again, in this area, there are some examples. For example, in 2021, the same UN committee that I mentioned earlier set up a new task team on the acquisition of global private sector data for official statistical purposes. The European Commission has also been significantly involved in similar activities via their expert groups. And in 2020, the Commission successfully entered into cooperation with 4 collaborative economy platforms on data sharing. But another very important initiative, and I suppose many of you know about it, is on incentivizing, is this the right word? Private, difficult to pronounce, private sector data collaboration, or it's better known as the Development Data Partnership. And the members of this partnership are the Inter-American Development Bank, the IMF, and our colleagues from IMF are connected and they follow this discussion, OECD and UNDP, and the World Bank, and the chief statistician of World Bank is also with us. And today, this partnership has entered into 28 pro bono data sharing agreements with companies and supports more than 250 projects across member organizations. The third thematic area is legislation, and references were made to the need of legal regulations, because legislation has an essential role in providing safeguards on ethical and privacy issues. And again, examples. At the European level, there have been rapid development, including a series of various legal decisions on general data protection regulation, e-privacy legislation, European data strategy, etc. But even at UNEC, my own organization, the legal aspects of the access to privately held data were also discussed in 2020 and 2021 at the UNEC expert meetings on modernizing statistical legislation. And we have such expert group, which is chaired by United Kingdom. And this expert group is doing excellent work. And in this expert meeting on statistical legislation, the meetings highlighted the need of harmonizing the rules of private data sharing and strengthening existing legal frameworks to support access to privately held data. The fourth thematic area where international organizations are involved is to develop guidelines and handbooks to support the national statistical offices. Again, a few examples we have from the UN at global level. Several task teams have been developing various recommendations on access to specific data sources. At my own organization, UNEC, last year, we published a guide to sharing economic data for official statistics. which provides guidance on communication with data providers and on making agreements concerning the use of data and building infrastructure for secure exchange. And another example is again at the European Union, and this is the ESSnet Big Data Multi-Partner Projects. The fifth area where international organizations are working is creating a common IT infrastructure, because creation of a common IT infrastructure facilitates the access to different data sources. The examples here again from the UN, where the UN Committee of Experts has built a UN Global Platform, which is a cloud service ecosystem. The OECD has also developed the Smart Data Platform to collect, structure, and store all input data from established and alternative sources. And at Eurostat, one of the related IT projects is the Trusted Smart Statistics Center. And the last thematic area is, of course, capacity development activities, where international organizations have developed trainings, capacity capacity development activities to strengthen institutional readiness. And two examples for you. This is at global level, the same UN Committee of Experts that have done quite a few capacity development activities. We, from the international organizations, we look forward to discussing how international organizations could facilitate access to data held by private sector. And we'll hear now the next presentation of a group that exists at UN global level. And as I said from the beginning, our role is to listen to you and see how we can facilitate your work. My final comment here is that yesterday we were talking about how we can make young generations excited about statistics. And here we have, I'm not supposed to use the word young because this talks about ageism, but new yet young colleague, we joined us, Jackie, who is sitting at the very end there. He is from Hong Kong, China. So he joined us just in August, and we decided to enthusiastically tell him, listen, here is a very important but very challenging area. Get in and start swimming. And my goodness, he swam. So why do I say this? Because he is behind the preparation of this, what I mentioned to you, but also he came up with the first draft of our position statement that we'll be discussing later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lydia. We start not losing trains, now we swim. That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Let us now go now to the presentation of the work of the task team on global facilitation of access to privately held data for official statistics. We have two presenters. I can see Stefan there moving the green light, sorry. Okay, so you will start, I guess, first, Stefan. He's director of, all you know, of the United Nations Statistics Division. And I hope we will have also Bartel Braxman, who is Innovation Manager of the Central Bureau of Statistics of Netherlands, somewhere up in the hyperspace. Okay, by the way, we are glad to tell you that we have 45 people following this interesting session in the hyperspace also. So I would like to thank them for their interest, and I hope we don't, we are doing our job properly here for according to their opinion. Stefan, thank you very much. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, and for the opportunity to give you a short briefing on what's happening at the global level, in particular a new initiative, which is the task team on global facilitation on access to privately held data. We will do this in two steps. I'll give a few introductory remarks, and then Bartel Braxma from the Netherlands, who are chairing this initiative, they will give a more detailed information. Let me just say, and I'm also, those of you who know me a little bit shameless, this will have at the end the character a bit of a sales pitch. This is a new initiative, so anybody who wants to come and dance or swim or whatever is the activity of the day with us, you are very much invited to do so. So I think this is an important topic. We said it several times, and I'm again very grateful for the conference for taking the leadership and putting some order into this thinking. We had started these types of discussions under the big data umbrella quite some time ago in the Statistical Commission. In fact, the creation of the Committee of Experts on Big Data for official statistics in 2014 started those discussions, and then we produced a background paper that in 2017 that started really the thinking on how to engage with the private sector long before the crisis. And I think I'm stating something obvious, but I mean, the developing countries need this even more than the highly developed countries. And it's not only a matter for them of getting more timely or more detailed information, but I mean, it's even sometimes a matter of filling their fundamental data gaps. And there is an increasing need for developing modalities of engaging the private sector to help official statistics, as I said, especially in developing countries. And of course, sharing of experiences is good. But I think we can go further. We can go even in the direction of collective bargaining, in particular, and with respect to one aspect that was perhaps not discussed so much here. There are global companies that have information that is relevant for quite a number of countries. We were focusing very much at the national level here. But I know this from my geospatial part of my existence, and the satellite data that are in lots of geospatial information, satellite information is in the hand of global private companies. And here really it is quite obvious that a poor individual statistical office should not be battling a global giant, but that we need to stand together and do collective bargaining. And of course, regulation is always one mode of interaction, but also asking ourselves the question, what is in there for the private sector to work with us? And we heard some of the elements. Sometimes even for the private sector, it is interesting for them to appear a good global citizen because their customers increasingly place a value on that and pay attention to that. So that's one modality. Also something that we mentioned several times is attracting young, talented resources. Even the private sector has, in a competitive environment, sometimes to offer more than just money to their future employees. But one particular aspect where the private sector really needs us at the global level is standardization. That's what we do. In the mapping area, I heard several times that global companies said, we don't want to have to deal with where the borders are, what a particular geography is called. We would like you to create international rules. And then this is helpful for us, and in exchange, we can provide information that is urgently needed. So I think there are some aspects that I found interesting in our interactions with the global private sector, which I just wanted to share with you. Now, specifically talking about this task team, it's a joint task team under the Big Data Committee and our new network of economists, economic statisticians. So it's a little bit, what we are talking about here right now is a little bit limited to the economic dimension. And I know a priori it is not limited to economics, but hey, you have to start somewhere. And one of the aspects that we really want to focus on is right now practically gaining access. How do we can practically gain access? And what you will see in a minute is an effort to get practical access. So I'm grateful for the Netherlands that they have taken the lead on that. And we also, with our efforts to create a global platform where different things can be stored for global use, not only data, but also tools to analyze and process and work with the data, and training material, which is something that developing countries are desperately asking us for. What can be done with this new wealth of private data, even once they have been made accessible. So we did this in the modality of sprints earlier this year, which was a quick sequence of webinars in a way, which is also a new modality. And we were quite happy that it actually attracted quite a number of people. We had in the end, I think over 100 people, experts from over 50 countries connecting to that. But here I'm getting into the detailed, and I think that's for me the point where I better turn over to Bartelt, who can give you more detailed information of what just happened and what will be happen as a consequence of these sprint discussions in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stefan. Bartel?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah.
So, Jackie, can you please start sharing the?
Good.
So if okay, then now you see.
It's okay. Good. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you for this opportunity to present the work of what you're doing that Stefan just introduced. As he already mentioned, we only just starting. So what I can tell is only very preliminary. About the sprint sessions that we did in January to March this year, and also the next steps. So next slide, please. So basically what we did was we drafted 4 sessions, each of something like 3 hours, where we all addressed different aspects of global value chains. First, we looked at the user's perspective, both from the World Bank as a user of global value chains results, and from the academic perspective from Duke University, Stacey Frederick, who's also contributed to UN guidelines on global value chains that are currently being circulated. The next sprint was from 3 organizations, UN Global Compact, Eurostat, and UNCTAD, who already are having some experience with work with private sector. UN Global Compact is a UN body that deals with corporate social responsibility. They already have a survey in place where they surveyed 10,000 global companies and even publish their results at an individual level. And these companies are willing to participate and also have their results published for this responsibility reasons. Eurostat presented something on the European approach that also Lydia just outlined, and UNCTAD explained some of their work on e-commerce. Then we went to the private sector, where we had 3 representatives with different backgrounds. Panjiva, and actually it's a subsidiary of Standard & Poor's, they try to collect information on global trade and supply chains and so on. They're very eager to work with us, on the one hand, to share what they already have, on the other hand, to enhance their own data position, because what they have is basically what they can get from Standard & Poor's and that kind of sources. So they're eagerly looking for improving their information position at the same time as they can help us. Floridata is a Dutch foundation working in the flower industry. Basically, they combine information of Dutch wholesale trade in flowers, which is one of the big players globally in the flower industry. And the interesting thing is that all these wholesale traders are competitors, but they have a common interest in a common date position that Floridata is for. They're also very eager to work with us in better understanding the whole world of flower trade. And ASML is probably also not very common. The company is one of the biggest Dutch industries. So what they do basically is produce machines with which you can make chips. So Intel, Samsung, and all these world players in the chips industry, they rely very heavily on the machines that ASML provides them. So they have a key role in this semiconductor business. And also they are willing to share data with us, and they also have an interest because their industry of semiconductors is very much dependent on the business cycle. So they're very eager to get better insights in how the business cycle works. So we also try to work with them to find out how we can get information from them and also help them to understand their world better. And then the final session was towards a community of practice, and that's what I'll talk on next. So what we did was, as Stefan already said, it was a new form with the online webinars, but not only passive, you also breakout sessions where people could discuss with each other. We organized some online polls in the Zoom sessions with panels and so. So altogether, it I think was quite successful with over 100 participants from more than 50 countries, a dozen international organizations, and so on. So as a start, it was very promising, but of course only a start. So now we're entering the next phase. So please go to the next slide. What we did was generate some insights from the session, which already showed that is very broad. Too much to tackle all at once, also because we're just starting. So we found all these relevant aspects: economic, employment, GDP, and so on. Sustainability, carbon footprint is the labor fare that's associated with global value chains. And the relative new thing is about geopolitical resilience. A resilience that can be resilience to the pandemic, resilience to a war, but also, for example, if the Suez Canal is blocked for a week by a ship, what does that mean for global trade? So there's many things that you could cover here. We saw that there's a lot of willingness to collaborate and also enthusiasm from the statistical community, where on the one hand, national institutes, they work from a national perspective, international organizations, they work from a global perspective, and also, as Linia pointed out, to support the national organizations. And we saw a mix of people that were in the sprints to learn. So capacity building, like Stefan already pointed out, for developing countries, is very important to become engaged in this. And also there were others who said, well, we want results from this because we need them. So it's quite a broad the range of insights, and please go to the next slide. What we then decided was that we would focus on 5 specific global value chains that you see here at the horizontals, where we set up 5 task teams, one in horticulture, so the flower industry, which is led by Colombia, which is also an important player in the global flower industry. For retail trade, United Arab Emirates will take the lead. They have already a relation with Carrefour, the big retail trader that's willing to collaborate here. The Maldives will take lead in tourism. The semiconductors, ASML, so will be led by the Netherlands. And e-commerce will be led by the UK. So we are just starting with setting up these task teams, where we look at 4 pillars that we also want to extract generic elements from the user needs perspective. Why would we do this at all? Who is waiting for results in this area? Some principles that relate to this, which also was mentioned already before. We have to develop methods, and we also want to invest in capacity building. And the next and final slide, please. This is something that we cannot do alone. These countries have volunteered to take the lead, but obviously, because it's something global, we have to work on a global level. So if you are interested in contributing one way or another, if you want to learn more, please contact us, and we see how you can contribute. So that's it from my side. I thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you very much, Bartel. I think we have no time for discussion now, so it's let me first thank Anil for his excellent works and contributions as always, and I think we go straight ahead to conclude the session about collaboration with the presentation of a position statement that is going to be presented by our chair. Patrick, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Juan, and thanks to everybody for what was a very insightful and I think important debate. I'm not going to read through the position statement because I know you've all read through it and many of you have commented on it. So I just want to give a little bit of an oversight as to how we have come to this draft of the position paper, and Juan and Anil might like to add something afterwards. I think the background is clear. I think we have to remember what this document is for, what the objective of the document is, and who the audience is. So the audience, of course, is for ourselves and for our staff, so that they know why we are going in the direction we're going. But it's also for policymakers and legislators
and private data providers that they're clear on what our direction of travel is, and that's an important part of this. So want to thank everybody for their feedback, because there has been an awful lot of feedback, very positive feedback, and a lot of that has been reflected in the proposed final draft that we're hopefully going to adopt here today. There was some feedback that hasn't gotten into the final draft, but not because it wasn't relevant, but perhaps what we were trying to do is that some of the feedback was perhaps a further elaboration of points that were already in the document, and it was additional detail. And I think perhaps that detail is going to have to come forward in supporting papers that will be developed over time that will sit in behind this position statement. Obviously, we wanted to keep the text very high level and strategic, and I think that's what this is. It's a strategic statement of our position statement, of our direction of travel. We also wanted to avoid what we call vague statements that were potentially open to interpretation and could inadvertently create conditions for access. So if we think about the audience, if we put in statements that are a little bit vague, it could be interpreted as a mechanism or a criteria that we would have to fulfill and that we would have to meet before we get access to the data. And therefore, on one or two occasions, that was the rationale for saying, yes, that's an important issue, but perhaps not directly in this statement now. There were also statements that could potentially inadvertently dilute the underlying intention of the statement, and that's really about, you know, the starting point, which is sustainable access to privately held data, and I think that was a part of it. So we wanted to be concise and we wanted to be unambiguous about what our position was and is. And we wanted to keep flexibility around as these sources evolve and as technologies evolve. And that's why we took out specific references to particular technologies, particular sources, because this is a statement that needs to last the test of time. And therefore references to methodologies or technologies and sources that are relevant now would potentially date the statement, and we want the statement to be timeless in many respects. And that's why some of those issues weren't there. I think a little bit like the discussion on core values, we all have particular little issues that we might want to put into it and little bits of semantics and language. But I think what's really important for us to reflect on is it fit for purpose? Is it good enough to articulate the CES position statement? And I think one of the things that when we were discussing this, and sometimes I think we've all had this experience, sometimes less is more. And I think this is one of those examples where a position statement of this nature, I think less is perhaps more. And I think that in a sense underlines the approach to trying to come to this final proposed text. So I think that's really all I want to say, unless Juan or Anil want to add anything to what I've said.
I'd just say it's a brilliant summary of our conversations that we've had, so fully supportive. Thank you.
Yeah, I would say the same. I think we were trying to elaborate a document that was that tried to be helpful for you when you want to have discussions with private enterprises or with government bodies in your communication, to have access to massive to big data. We tried, as you mentioned already, Patrick, we try to fly high. We try to give a high overview of the ideas and I believe your interests. And that's why probably we haven't taken into account all your comments. We mostly of them were right and we agreed on them, but probably at some points they were too precise, or they were flying too low for a document that we wanted to be open and useful for all of you. That's I think the intention of us. Thank you. Patrick, come back to you.
Okay, so I think have we the proposed conclusion to bring up on the screen? Or have we a text? Decisions? Yeah. Sorry, Stella, thank you. Yeah. Okay. At this point, we should probably tell a joke to try and break the silence, but I don't think any of the jokes I have to tell you might laugh at, so.
No, I cannot find it.
We've lost the conclusion.
She didn't expect it to come so.
We came too soon, I think. Okay, so the conference endorses the outcome of the in-depth review on collaboration with private sector data providers as outlined in document 11 and addendum 1 to document 11, and thanks CES Stat for translating the in-depth review into Russian. The conference adopts the position statement on the access to data held by the private sector for purposes of official statistics, and encourages all national statistical offices and international organizations to use the document in their communications and negotiations about access to data held by the private sector. Asks the CES Bureau to discuss the follow-up to this session and decide on further steps at its October 2022 meeting. Can we agree on this? See no flags. It's so adopted.
Now we can applaud.
We can applaud. Okay, it's now nearing lunchtime, and we are at the end of.
There was the decision from yesterday.
Ah, yes, I've been reminded we had a decision yesterday on data stewardship that formally we couldn't adopt until we had the interpreters. So we have another pause now while we bring up that decision to remind people. So if we just hold on another couple of minutes, and I'm sure, well, I'm just going to say we'll get out very shortly, but there are a couple of announcements that we want to make at the end. So just to remind us all from yesterday on the session, item 8D on the developments in data stewardship, the joint CES UN-GGIM Europe plenary session welcomes the progress on the report on data stewardship, encourages other stakeholders in the statistical system and the public sector, such as central banks, geospatial agencies, other government agencies to contribute to the work, and supports the task force to continue and proceed with the second stage of the work to develop a maturity model and possible guidance, and finalize the report taking into account comments from the electronic consultation. The report is planned to be submitted to the CES 2023 CES plenary session for endorsement. I think we'll speed it up. Done. Thank you very much. Okay, I see Juan is in a hurry to get down to his chair. And Neil is also already at his chair. I didn't see that. They're very fast moving people. They're certainly catching trains very quickly. And Dominic, no, stay, Dominic. Please stay. But I just want to thank them for the sessions, and I want to thank Juan for, Juan is going to sit down there. Juan, sorry, wants to say something.
Me the floor, so I just decided to to go to my place. But let me say as a chair that it has been a pleasure to moderate this session. It was a very interesting exchange of ideas and a nice document that brought up from here. So I think it's very nice end of the session. Thank you very much, Pedrick. Thank you very much, Anil, for the work, and of course to the UNICE Secretariat for all this work that is never seen but is there, and it contributes that everything runs smoothly. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Juan, and thanks for organizing such an excellent session. I think an excellent session. Okay, so we're at the end of 2.5 days of the 70th plenary of the CES, and so we're going to bring it to a close. I think it's been an excellent 2.5 days. I think there's a real sense of collegiality, and I always use this word family inside in this room. And that's always a great feeling when you're in a room like this where you feel you're amongst friends and you can say what's on your mind. We don't always have to agree, but I think there's a real benefit in all of us putting our flags up, which it isn't easy to do sometimes. So I can remember as a young fella always being the fear of putting up the flag. I used to hate it, but it's changed over time. But I think it's been an excellent 2.5 days. The first thing I want to do is I want to thank all of you, the delegates here, for the 2.5 days. I think everything is, I always say organizations are actually about the people, and international organizations are about the people. Then in collaborations like this and the CES, it's all about the people, and it's all about the people in this room and your people at home. So I think the success of this plenary session has been down to you and your active participation in all of the discussions. It's also down to your staff at home who do so much work, whether it's on the CES task forces, whether it's supporting the in-depth reviews, or whether it's on any of the activities of HLG Moss. And we heard yesterday, 1,000 people, over 100 organizations. That is the value that you are placing on all of this work. That is the effort that we are making as a statistical community. And I think while we continue to collaborate together, we can compete and collaborate with anybody. And I think it's great that I think we need to remind ourselves, I think Ian said it really well, we exist for two reasons, in my view: to provide evidence to support decision makers so they make the best decisions they can, but to ensure that the citizens of our countries can live in an informed society. And I think the provision of independent and objective data is absolutely at the heart of that. And if we cede that to private compilers whose motivation may change over time, I think we have a problem. So I think we have a real responsibility and an obligation to step up and to step into this space and to continue to do our jobs in the way that we have, as we have always done. So I think that just to say thanks to all of you. I want to thank the session organizers. All of the sessions were run extremely well. The speakers spoke extremely well. And I think the papers that were presented were excellent. And again, without those papers, without the organizers, without the contributors, it wouldn't work. The secretariat here beside me, it's incredibly easy to chair a conference like this. When you have a secretariat like this, I think you don't see the work that goes into the preparation for a conference like this. I've seen it myself, thankfully, over the last while, basically I say what they tell me to say, with a little bit of editorial license here and there. But it's just the amount of work that goes into it from their end, every long hours, weekdays, weekends. It's incredible. And I think this conference wouldn't be what it is without the secretariat. So I think they deserve a particular round of applause. So thank you very much. The interpreters, it must be very hard to interpret technical conversations, and especially when you have people speaking a little bit too fast, like I do. And Dominic, I think Dominic and I have been given we've been given that order. We speak a little bit too fast, but thank you very much to the interpreters. We ran over time a couple of times, but we really appreciate your patience and the work that you do, because it's a critical part of a conference like this. The last thing, okay. The last thing I want to say, it's about our esteemed Director of Statistics in the UNECE. I'm not sure if all of you know this or realize this, but this is Lydia's last plenary CES session as she retires next year. So she reminded me earlier on, she's not gone straight away, but this is her last plenary session. And I think it would be remiss of us as a community not to recognize the role that Lydia has played over so many years. I won't say how many years, Lydia, but I think all of us who know Lydia are just struck by her passion, her energy, her enthusiasm, and her knowledge for the work. And I think it's infectious. I think the success of the CES as a community and as a group, and I think the success, and if we just look at how HLG Moss has changed over a relatively short period of time, of course, the success of this is down to very many people, but I think Lydia in particular has played an incredibly important and central role in all of that for us over very many years. And I think she's the epitome of leadership. And I think that we shouldn't ever underestimate leadership. And so, Lydia, all I want to do is say thank you very much, first of all, for bringing me into the community and for giving me an opportunity to contribute. Thanks for all of your work over so many years. And I think we all wish you long life, health, and happiness when you do eventually retire.
Yes. Ay, ay, ay. Oh, but I have to speak. Oh, thank you. Yes, I have to react. I mean, as I said, ay, who betrayed me? I have asked my chiefs, you should not mention to anyone, Tina, Stephen, who? Anyway, so probably it's visible on my face, but can you imagine the conference without me?
No.
Not the new director generals, but some other colleagues that have been around for many years, like Stefan, for example, Schweinfest, Aya, shall we compete? Who has been longer here? Well, I think it's about time to go. And I have been in official statistics for it will be 42 years. Aya, you're still beating me on that. The mother of my daughter-in-law often asks her, why are you retiring? And I say, soon. When are you retiring? Soon. I said, no, I don't believe you'll never retire. But I will next year in spring, and it will be just 2 months before, that's the plan, unless the UN Secretary General decides that there is this statistician over there, and she has to stay longer, but I doubt. Now, over the last 3 days, I've been listening, and often I forget that this is probably my last, and I said, oh, wow, we're going to do this and we'll do that. But this morning, I decided to put a festive dress. It's nice, no? And I prepared myself. My husband was about to drive me to the office, and he looked at me and said, wow, you look very nice, which is rare. I may not remember the last conference plenary, but I will definitely remember what he said this morning, because he's a very conservative German. Now, I think I was born with the conference because it was in 1990. 1990, calculate the years, how many these years? When I was a young statistician, I was not with the international department, but I was at that time, though young, I was head of a small division who was looking for someone who knows about statistics, speaks English, etc. And he wanted to accompany him because the Bulgarian president at that time was member of the CES bureau, a very well recognized expert. So I started attending the bureau and the conference in 1990. Since then, many people with whom I worked, retired, went elsewhere, are still there. So I better go. But over these years, I have done 12 years at national level because I'm Bulgarian, and the rest of the years at international level. And at that time in 1991, attending the plenary sessions, there were not that many countries. Bulgaria was always next to Canada. So I was sitting next to the head of international relations. Many of you may know Bella Prigley. And then you come A, B, C, we were always at the front. And he wanted to bring me to be nice to me. And in the middle of the heated discussion, he starts taking out chocolates from his pocket and makes a lot of noise. And he gives me a chocolate, everyone looking at me. You can imagine how I felt. But since then, Canada is very dear to my heart. And wherever I go, the conference follows me. In 93 actually, I was offered a job at OECD. By the way, January 93, I was the very first expert from non-member state that was given a contract as a consultant, because we are working in a special division to help transition economies, and I was assisting countries. And the conference followed me, because all of a sudden in 94, the conference was held and hosted by OECD. That was, Paul, in case you don't know, in 94, around that or 95, The first times, this alternating 1 year in Paris, 1 year in Geneva started happening. And then OECD doesn't have Russian interpretations. And they hired interpreters from elsewhere, from outside. They started interpreting, but they didn't know the context. And in the middle, they stopped because they could not translate which language? Australian. And everything stopped. We don't understand. So a big confusion, and I'm running because I speak Russian, and I was helping. So I was even helping interpretation. Anyway, I think you're right. It's people refer to me Lydia, but it's not Lydia, it's the whole team. And as I often say, what would we do without Tina? And more recently, without Tina and Gosha. Because these people are behind all the work on conference and bureau. But it's not only Tina and Gosha. What do we do without Karsten Bolsen? Karsten, thank you for sitting until the end here, our chief of economic statistics. Or what would I do without Andres Vicat, also sitting here, the head of social demographic statistics? And Take, the modernization work would have not developed as much without Take and his team. But everyone knows Stephen well. Hey, Stephen, we have done so. Whenever in doubt, I say, talk to Stephen. So this is the team. And we have worked together. That's the way you build a team. We have been together for more than 10 years. We don't talk even. We just look at each other and we perfectly understand each other. Anyway, yesterday, Francesca is still there. Yes, Francesca, from UNSD. Everyone knows Francesca. She was asking, are you happy, unhappy that you'll be retiring? I said, no, I'm happy. It's about time to go. I'll do other things. Yes, I plan to do other things, nothing to do with statistics. And finally, when I finished, I wanted to go to university. I didn't want to study statistics. I wanted to study international relations, but in communist Bulgaria, because my parents were workers in a village, no communist background, I was not allowed. I ended up in statistics. They told me you can choose from this. And I said, statistics, what is this? But it was, I'm there by chance. The first, on the top of the list. I said, okay, I don't care. But I got into statistics. I had studied economics, master's in statistics. I was accepted. I go back to my village, a small village. My mother, and what? Mother, I got a post in statistics to study. She said, what is this? I said, well, and she said, well, how am I going to say this to the neighbors in the village? I mean, can't I say that you'll study something else? I said, Mother, what? Something to do with medicine, with engineering. I said, no, Mother, we are not lying. So my mother is not there, but I made it. I got in statistics, then in the statistical offices. But what I said is, let me see what I'll do, the best I can do out of it. And I think I have done the best out of it. My mother is somewhere there. Maybe she can see it. So this is my story. I'm not crying because it's my last session. I cried about my mother. So what I want to say at the end, after being for so many years, nationally, internationally, and in view of our discussion yesterday, my conclusion, dear Chair, to work in official statistics, you need passion and enthusiasm. And I still have some work to do. I have been training you for 4-6 years now. You still have to learn to speak slowly, articulating, so that everyone can understand you. Thank you, dear colleagues. Thank you, all of you. I'll be still there. Hey, so I'm not leaving soon. So I'll be taking the floor to fix whenever we have problems and to answer to Stefan. You know, Stefan and the UN. Oh, let's discuss this or give the floor to Lydia before she starts jumping. You have said this, Stefan. but jumping means enthusiasm. Thank you.
Okay, we're nearly there, but Tina wants to write a reply.
No, thank you. No, because I cannot beat that, and I don't intend to. But there are just some few housekeeping things that I still need to say. So first of all, we adopted the decisions here, but we will summarize these rich and really fantastic discussions that we had. We will prepare summaries and then send these to you all so that you can send comments if there is something which is not maybe so rightly reflected. There will be an evaluation questionnaire. Maybe Caroline already sent you the link. Please fill this in, and then we really value your feedback so that we know what to do better, and we know what you liked and what you didn't like. I encourage you to take the publications which are there in the back, because over lunch the room will be set now differently for the next meeting, and those publications will disappear from there. And also, yes, we need to change the seating for the next meeting. So if you have your personal things, if you can put them just aside, and then you can leave them in the room, but then after lunch you may be sitting in another place. And then just to remind that in the evening after this OECD session finishes, we have another photo opportunity, because now people have changed, and then there will be a reception offered by Switzerland, and this will be in this same place as we had the reception on Monday, in the Serpent Bar area 17. So with this, thank you for your attention, and the OECD meeting will continue here at 2:30. And bon appetit for lunch.
Okay, the CES is adjourned. Thank you very much. Very good.